right. Hello, everybody, and hello, Herbert. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, Joanna. It's my pleasure to be with you today.
Yeah, and once again, I want to thank you for giving a webinar back in April just for all Taiwanese teachers. That's very special for us. Thank you also for agreeing to share with us or kind of like remind the teachers some of their Q&A, their questions, which I think most of them you did answer in real time during the webinar, but I think it would be a good reminder, especially in a kind of like a back to school session, for us to review some of your great thoughts. For me, that was very insightful.
Thank you. Well, welcome, dear colleagues in Taiwan, to this Q&A session. I would like to thank you very, very much for your interesting questions. Just to make this clear, I'm talking here from my study in my home in Austria. So Joanna I've prepared a PowerPoint. Joanna's got the PowerPoint, and she's going to share the PowerPoint now. And I will have to ask you, Joanna, to switch to the next slides whenever it's needed. As I've said, thanks so much for your excellent questions. In fact, Joanna, if we go to the next slide, we can see I've prepared a bunch of flowers for you all for thinking deeply and coming up with such interesting questions. Well, actually, here are the questions that we didn't manage to answer in the live webinar. Joanna, please go to the next slide. Question. Question number 2. How can we guide primary and secondary learners to ask and answer questions? A key point, we want them to be able to communicate in English.
Yeah.
But some of them are maybe a bit shy, some of them need more help. What kind of support systems do we have as teachers? Many of us use so-called substitution tables when it comes to facilitating our students speaking. We can see one on the next slide, actually. This is a quotation that comes from Paul Nation, who says he says teachers need to make sure that substitution tables do not only provide opportunities for exact repetition, but that students that they also provide opportunities for repetition involving generative use. Okay, so as we know, substitution tables help to create linguistically correct sentences and to express, and they help our learners to express themselves meaningfully. But we need to make sure actually that we give them the time, the thinking time, so that they select what they want to say. This is what Paul Nation is actually pointing out here, the generative use supported by substitution tables. Let's have a look at the next slide, where I have prepared a little substitution table. This is, as you can see, about the use of digital gadgets, technology, and learners can say various sentences here. Obviously, we don't want them just when we say, okay, now use this to give me sentences. We don't want them to say, I don't use smartphones to talk to my friends, if it's actually not true. You see what I mean? We want them to produce sentences that are actually meaningful. And by the way, I'm sorry, there is a typo here. It should, no, sorry, I misread. I don't use my smartphone. to talk to my friends would be a sentence that we probably don't want them to produce. Okay, so we want them to think and select carefully, so the language they produce is not only correct but also meaningful. How do I do that? Well, I do that by first of all reading out to them the first, from top down, possible sentence. Okay, I use my tablet to play games. And I point out to them that I can make new sentences by replacing a word with something else. So when I say I don't use my tablet to play games, I get a sentence that means something very, very different. Or if I say I use my laptop to do homework, then again, it follows the same pattern, but I get different sentences and obviously also a different meaning. Okay, so what I ask my students to do here now is I point at just one word like tablet, and I ask them to make suggestions how they could replace tablet, create a sentences which is different. Just different sentences first, where meaning is not important. So they create sentences like, I don't use my smartphone to play games, or somebody else says, I use my laptop to listen to music, etc., etc., etc. And then I say, okay, I'll give you 30 seconds now, and I want you to really make sentences that are true for you. So not just correct, but also true for you. And then we get interesting things, okay? So for example, a student might say, I don't use my smartphone to play games. And then I say, that's interesting. Do you never play digital games? And then this boy or girl might say, oh, yes. But I use my laptop to do that, or I use my tablet to do that, etc. So it's not just about creating correct sentences. It's about saying meaningful things that the teacher picks up on, that the teacher shows an interest in, that the teacher sometimes asks one more question on, or the teacher actually tries to get into a little conversation every now and then. Sometimes, of course, they just say a sentence. You might say, that's interesting, thank you very much, etc., etc. Okay, let's have a look at the next slide. So that's the principle. This is from Superminds, and as you can see down here, so it's basically about carrying out conversations at a sandwich shop between a customer and a sales assistant, and or a sandwich maker and the customer. And down there we have useful language. So we have things like, can I help you? I'd like please. Sorry, we haven't got any. Have you got any? How about? I like a lot. Here you are. Can I have? Etc. 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 So the principles that I introduced previously, talking about this substitution table, is actually first of all making sure students understand the language. Secondly, making sure they know that they're not just supposed to make sentences, but they should make meaningful sentences. In other words, when the sandwich maker says, can I help you? They should, for example, say, can I have a cheese sandwich? But if they don't like cheese, then it doesn't make sense. Then they have other options here. They can say, can I have, I'd like a tomato sandwich, please, and so on and so forth. So it's about making clear they understand, they have choices, giving them time to study the language in the language box or in the substitution table, and then giving them time to select and make meaningful use of the language here. This is from student book 3 of Superminds. The next example is an example from the second edition of Think. The second student's book, actually. So the question is, have you ever, what happened, what did you ask, what was the risk, what did you lose? So for example, have you ever lost your watch? What happened, etc., etc., etc. This is, of course, taken out of the context of a whole page, okay? And now you help them understand the language, you help them use it, you help them use it meaningfully, and then they have to find someone who's made a big mistake, who's done some chores at home this week, who's got a job, who's lost something important, who's taken a big risk, who's formed a group, etc., etc. And then they walk around and they say, have you ever lost something important, etc., etc., etc. And then they talk and take notes. Obviously, in order to explain this fully, we would need to look at the whole page in the book. So the point I'm making is, don't see substitution table only as support for your students to make correct sentences. That is very important. The other important thing is that they actually make meaningful sentences. If they ask each other, have you ever lost something important? Then the student shouldn't just say, yes, I have, if they haven't. So we want a real sort of chat, a real conversation that starts here. Let's have a look at the next page. Next slide. So this is just basically writing up what I have suggested here. Use substitution tables regularly, explain them well, give them time to think. Use backward chaining to support them with memorizing longer sentences. Backward chaining is a fantastic support that helps students to retain in their memory longer structures. For example, have you ever lost something that was really important for you? That is a long sentence. Have you ever lost something important? 10 syllables, okay? So we might want to help students by getting them to repeat the sentences from back to front. Important, and then everybody says important. Something important. Something important. Lost something important. Lost something important. Ever lost something important. Ever lost something important. Until in the end they say, have you ever lost something important? That helps them remember the sentence. You start saying it word for word from back. Then you say 2 words to front, from back to front, 1 word, repeat, 2 words, repeat, 3 words, repeat, etc., etc. That helps them enormously. What else do we use in order to get them to ask and answer questions? Regularly engage them in small talk. Show them you're interested in their answers. So come to class, and when the student is already there, hi, how are you today? Did you have a good weekend? Etc., etc., etc. And try to remember some of their answers, because you can use them again later. Somebody says, I don't know, I played football, I scored a goal, I really love football. Then the next time you can ask and say, have you played football again? Did you score a goal again? Etc., etc. Make question time sessions a regular feature in your classroom. Say, okay, we've got 3 minutes now. You can ask me questions. Okay, they like that. The teacher is always interesting for them. You can get them to ask you questions. If you work with beginners, give them prompts. What's your favorite? Do you like? Have you got? Etc. 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 Later, when they're familiar with these questions, ask them to ask these questions to each other. And occasionally, and that is to show them that you are interested in what they have found out from their partners, occasionally ask them what they've learned about their partners, okay? And the next point is, and this is also something that comes up again in a question later, how do we correct in a question time session? My suggestion would be, don't do a lot of correction there, because especially when you have shyer students, you want to praise them for asking you questions. You might correct discreetly. So if sometimes, for example, says, I don't know, in a question time session, where you going for your holiday, and this is obviously not correct in terms of the time. It would be, where did you go for your holiday, or where are you going for your next holiday? Then we just correct discreetly. You mean where I went for my last holiday. You can, however, later, maybe in the next lesson or at the end of the class, help them to correct the language that you noticed they didn't get correctly in their questions. So these are a few suggestions, a few further suggestions.